Cambridge Arts Roundup with Simon Bertin.
Cambridge Radio.
Hello, I'm Simon Bertin and welcome to Cambridge Arts Roundup, an hour where we'll encounter pure poetry from a leading light and then visit a top-ranking African sculptor. In this edition, poet Katrina Porteous recites remarkably at Magdalene College and talks on her new book Rhizodont, which is shortlisted for the T.S Eliot Prize. And we learn about the spiritual aspects of sculptural work from Zimbabwe at the workshop of artist Euwitt Nayanhongo, who's shaping work in stone as a labour of love. It's not often one gets to meet a truly excellent contemporary poet who's willing to give an exposition tête-à-tête. Unfortunately, given the chance, I found the mind of Katrina Porteous a feast of nourishing poetic ideas, following an invitation to meet her from Magdalene College undergraduate poet Joe Wright. Katrina was at one time a pupil of Seamus Heaney at university in America and has been shortlisted for the 2024 T.S Eliot Prize. Her work captures the living nature of things as she experiences them and often centres on life in fishing communities of her native Northumberland. She's recently published a new anthology entitled Rhizodont, which incidentally is the fossil of a creature that emerged from the sea and that we're all descended from in terms of evolution. Katrina graduated from Trinity Hall in Cambridge in 1982 with a double first in history. In 1982-4, she travelled in the USA on a Harkness Fellowship, studying at Berkeley, California and Harvard universities. She returned to Cambridge, England in 1985 and in 1987 moved to her grandparents' house on the Northumberland coast. A broadcaster and performance poet, she's also worked on music collaborations with East Anglian artist James Dodds, Northumbrian piper Chris Ormiston, and English concertina virtuoso Alistair Anderson. I found her charismatic style of performance is certainly addictive.
I'm going to read Skylark, which is from my first book, The Lost Music. Skylark. Suddenly, above the fields, you're pouring pure joy in a shower of bubbles, lacing the spring with the blue thread of summer. You're the warmth of the sun in a song. You're light spun to a fine filament, sun on a spider thread, that delicate. You're the lift and balance the soul feels, the terrible, tremulous, uncertain thrill of it. You're all the music the heart needs, full of its sudden fall, silent fields. I was lying in a field near the Long Nanny Burn in the dunes at Beadnell, and the skylarks are very prolific there, and in the springtime they sing very much all around you, so multi-channel skylarks, and they are just so wonderful, and I was responding to them.
I love that empathy that you have showing the skylark from lots and lots of angles. You can really feel the joy in the whole thing, which is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you developed your orientation to the world as a poet.
Well, I studied history as an undergraduate here in Cambridge at Trinity Hall, but I was already writing poetry quite seriously. I mean, very bad poetry, but when I started here. So I was born in Aberdeen. I grew up in County Durham. Both my parents were from northeast England. I grew up in just outside of a place called Consett, which at that time was a steel town. Coming to Cambridge to read history was absolutely wonderful, and a kind of great unfolding of connection and literary possibility, although I didn't study English, but it was a really different world. But I found it very hard to write here, and I continued in the academic world for a bit because I had a fellowship in America. So I went over, had a year in California at Berkeley, and then a year at Harvard. I ended up coming back to Cambridge briefly to try to begin an academic career, and knew straight away that it wasn't for me. The opportunity arose really to go and live in my grandmother's house on the Northumberland coast and try to make a living as a freelance writer, which at the time, it was the middle of the 1980s, and at that time it was sort of just about possible to do that. You know, if you lived on a shoestring and you had a house, you know, I had a roof over my head, so I just needed to pay the bills. I'd been writing all the time, still quite badly, I think, but I went there, and I got the Gregory Award from the Society of Authors at the end of the 1980s, which was very good for kind of confirming that I wasn't a complete lunatic to try to do this, and it was also quite a significant amount of money. So I was then able to continue for a bit, and I've never really left. But the great thing about going to live in Beadnell was, as a historian, I very quickly became interested in the local history of the area, which meant that I went to talk to the old people in the village, and most of those people were from fishing families. And so I was introduced to really another whole university, frankly, another whole world of knowledge.
And what do you love about fishing communities and those things?
It's many layered. I think that I'm strongly drawn to that, to the community, the village aspect of it, and the closeness and the supportiveness, which isn't all, it wasn't all wonderful, because there were great enmities and feuds that carried on between families from generation to generation. But when it came down to it, it was quite a pared back way of life, and there was a lot of danger involved in it, and people did support one another when tragedy struck or when things became hard. So there was really a sense of community in that true sense. But there was much more to it for me than that, because I was already familiar with pit villages, really, because my mother's family comes from a mining village in just outside of Durham. And they have that strong sense of community as well, where everybody does the same work, and there's a sense of purpose and family ties and commitment to the place. But in fishing, and particularly in that very traditional small boat fishing, which was carried on the coast of Northumberland, they fished with boats called cobles, which were a really ancient way of life. And it was the connection to place, I think, and the sense always that the sea was the boss, the sea was in charge, nature was in charge, and that ultimately submission to nature and the sense of wanting the way of life to carry on to the next generation, and therefore being really stewards of the sea and looking after the sea, as well as taking a harvest from it, but not kind of just taking everything in the way that I think industrial fishing latterly did. I think it was that drew me to it.
Would you like to read to us the Wand and the Wetter?
I can read you an extract from it. It's in a book called Two Countries. I'll just give you a little bit of background to this, because I wrote this poem to a commission from Iron Press and the Northumbrian Language Society at the end of about 1999, so it's a long time ago. A number of my friends in the fishing community had just died in the preceding years. They were all old people, and they'd come to the end of their life. So the language that they spoke was going with them. And because I'd spent so much time with them and recording conversations with them, some of them recorded on tape, most of them just recorded in my head and in notebooks, I went through many, many conversations and lifted out phrases that they used, words that they used, things that I thought were going to vanish, and I used them in this poem. So the whole structure of the poem came from phrases and things that people said. So it's very much based on speech. And a lot of it is comprised of lists, really. I can mind the time when the men would stand on the top of the bank looking out for the land, and the sooner their crack was as good as a sang as they reeled off the marks they had loaned for sae lang. For langeth and culleth the cumly car, for the bus of the bone to the shard and the bar. Faggot, the Stenny Hills, Fiddler's Face, the Cockcross Stone and on hob-hard place at Harrods who's planting on Ardweir's hut. The church on the Black Rock, where you shoot sooth for the smooth at the Benty Gut. To the Cundy Rock and the Trink of the Sand, Rita Blow Featherblah, by she was grand. You could listen on it, there were spells, them words, the map and the key to the treasure hoard. Now gie us the marks for to find them again. How we doing to the churchyard and ask the hard men, for it's come with the wand and gone with the wetter. We'll no be wanting them now. But to hear 'em goller in our boat, with the sounds of the Norsemen still thick i' their throat. For Carl into fish room, in waver to crook, you'll never find these in the page on a book. Ah, but they're bonny, the pets on a cowbell, Dipper the forefoot, Langer the scalbel, for Takiak and Gripe to the horns of her scut, for her thofts to her thowels. They had names for the lot that unlocked a hale world. Which is no to forget the fagarish found in a fisherman's hut. You'd say it could do wi' a right read up. With pellets and duckers and pickets and poys, swallows and sweels and bows for boys, rowels and bowls and barky sneeds, the table are clad with perrons of threed, with hoppins and hingins that's toozles like tows, and pokes for the hullocks and bundles of scoubs, and clutes for a dopper the caldies a chout. But hey, look who different gan in there, you'll never get loused 'cause she's Wizenbank fair. It are tummels out in a rusty shore, the nets on raffle with cludes of store, you van I scumfish before you can call for the becket, the braille, the ripper, and all the whoopings and leashins aback of the war. By lad, she's a right tagareen man's hall. And it's nae bother it's nane to shut the door on yon, put out the light, forget the names, we'll never be wanting them things again. It's come with the wind and gone with the wetter. We'll no be needing them now. One of my tutors, I've had many very, very wonderful tutors in my life. Although I didn't study English, I did creative writing courses in America when I was there on my Harkness Fellowship. And I did have Seamus Heaney for a short time as my tutor at Harvard. And Seamus Heaney said to me, I was trying to make up my mind whether I wanted to stay in America or go back to England at the end of my time. And Seamus Heaney said to me, if you go back to England, he said, you can connect with your community at home, and you might have something in you like Under Milkwood.
I mean, how long did it take you to make such a piece like that?
It was a commission, and it was quite a short deadline, so it didn't take really all that long. But you have to remember that it was 1999, so I'd already been with the Fishermen for 10 years. So it probably took 10 years.
Well, you just published a book which has been shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize. What's the tale that centres on?
The book is called Rhizodont, which is the name of a fossil fish which was found a few years ago right on the north edge of the Northumberland coast, and it's 330 million years old. And this fish belongs to a family called the Sarcopterygians, which means fleshy finned, and that family of fishes, over a course of many millions of years, made a transition from water onto land, and all quadrupeds, including human beings, are descended from that family. So I wrote a poem about that fossil some years ago as part of a series which was about Holy Island and its hinterland. So I had the poem. Now, in the preceding dozen years or so, I'd worked on a number of sequences. I often write to commission, and a lot of these sequences were commissioned poems, but they fell into two groups. One group was poems about the northeast coast. Some of them were about the Durham coast, some of them were about birds around about Amble, some of them were about Holy Island and its surroundings, as I said. So I had this sequence of poems, and I also had another group of poems which were science-based. I'd published a book at the end of 2019, which was some of the science poetry, which had been written for a planetarium in Newcastle. And they'd taken a long time. I'd worked with a composer who was based here in Cambridge, and they were performance pieces. So we'd been writing these science poems, or I'd been writing these science poems to perform with music. And I'd been working with scientists at various universities to try to learn about science, because I have no background in science. The last of that sequence was a sequence called Under the Ice, and it was about techniques which are used in Antarctica to look through the ice. So it's remote sensing techniques and also sampling techniques that are used to examine the landscape of Antarctica under the ice, and thereby to learn about climate change on a very grand, enormous geological scale. So I'd written that sequence, and I'd performed it with my composer friend, Peter Zinoviev, who very sadly died just as it was finished, really. I had that sequence of poems, and then subsequently I'd been commissioned to write another sequence of poems, again working with a scientist, an engineer, this time a young engineer, who worked in robotics. And that was for a podcast. It was another audio piece. So here were these two groups of poems about science that didn't seem to have very much connection to the poems about the northeast coast. But when I lay them all out on the floor, like you do when you're putting a book of poems together, I could really see resonances between the groups, because the poems about the northeast coast had a lot of sense of deep time in them, with this sense that the rocks of the coast and the rocks where the Rhizodont was found, and the rocks that indeed I look out at from my house at Beadnell, they're very ancient. You know, they're 330, 350 million years old, carboniferous rocks, the same kind of rocks that you get coal from, that period of geology. So I had this sense of deep time on the coast that comes through, I think, in the poems. And then also this sense of technology, remote sensing, robotics, some degree of artificial intelligence, some degree of the way humanity is kind of engineering its future, which we can't possibly know, but looking forward to that. So I had that kind of sense of a fulcrum, and I felt that the Rhizodont, its family moving from water onto land, was a kind of metaphor for a transition that, you know, we're facing as a species ourselves. You know, we are very, very new as a species. How long have we been around? You know, depending on how you judge the human race, you know, 500,000 years, you know, hominids maybe 1 million years, as we are, Homo sapiens, just a few 100,000 years. So we're very, very new in this sense of deep time. And I just wanted, I've always felt that my work is a complete continuum. I don't think of the science poetry as being separate from the fishing poems. I think it's all one thing. And it's about trying to place us, human beings, in this great scale of nature. You know, nature is so grand and we are so tiny. And yet we're also so extraordinary, because we, you know, as far as we know, alone in the universe, have kind of begun to understand some of this and actually engineer it and change it, you know, for better and for worse. This is from Rhizodont, and it's Antarctica without its ice. And just to introduce it, cores of sediment taken from the seabed in the western part of Antarctica have shown that about 90 million years ago there was no ice on Antarctica. The climate was very much warmer then, and it was completely forested. So that's quite a thought, isn't it? 90 million years ago is not really all that long, but it's of course very long in human terms. Antarctica without its ice springs back naked above the ocean, something recovered from the pitch-black remotest depths, raddled, ragged, honeycombed old bones. What has eaten you in the dark, the cold, the too many sunsets, your million-year winters, chewed you to filigree? An archipelago, black vertebrae worn down, spat out on a far shore, too huge, too much forgotten, seamed, scarred, rooked, ripped, pitted, foul-bitten, unrecognizable without your great burden. Volcanoes, molten. Miles-high mountains rear up out of the sea, disordered, rewritten over and over so many times. What is there left to make sense of? Only space, endless, pitch black, icy. In orbit, a cold eye opens. So this poem is actually called #Rhizodont. I wasn't allowed to call the book that because it was going to be difficult to catalogue it, I think, with a hashtag online. But the hashtag is there for a reason, because it's sort of gently pointing us in the direction of what I was talking about, our human transition from our analogue and sense-based world to a world that is perhaps going to be dominated by technologies beyond our bodies and indeed beyond ourselves, but by AI. So this is #Rhizodont. Then, in a flash, it claps shut. An ambush. Teeth, fangs, tusks, crunch, rip, snap. The Rhizodont, dragging itself out of water. The old world sinks and slips beneath its tilted strata. We're all on a journey. This one's about us, unearthing ourselves from a place somatic, interlaced, to be conjured from light and sent invisible everywhere for everyone to possess. The children stare at their phones, a fervent, lit-up, incorporeal congregation, some deep residual root in a life everlasting, outlasting them like a fossil sarcopterygian fish.
Beautiful. Thank you. Which other poets inspire you and why? What was your experience of James Healy? What kind of a person was he?
He was immensely warm, immensely generous of himself and of his time, very supportive and just a lovely man to be around. When you're in a different country and you're in your early 20s, you're sort of influenced by everything and you're going in all sorts of directions. And he sort of confirmed in me the sense that to go back to my roots was probably a good thing to do. So that sort of answers part of your question. There was another poet in America, Robert Pinsky, who was at that time in California, and he was a great influence too, because he emphasized poetry as music and sound, and he was a great person in my life. But then, just in terms of reading, Ted Hughes was really my big influence when I was young. I loved Ted Hughes' poetry. I think it's possible he's not read so much now, but he should be. And then Scottish poets, people like the Orkney poet George Mackay Brown, again, a poet who's very much rooted in one place and writing about small and particular communities, and yet also writing, about universal things. So, and then I would also like to speak about another strand, which is perhaps not so much talked about as poetry, but has been immensely important to me, which is a strand which is connected to music, the anonymous ballad tradition of the Northeast and song tradition that comes out of that, folk song tradition. I think that's been really important to me, to my work. And then the kind of widely connected folk song from America that was influenced by that then came back to this country, and people like Bob Dylan, they were important to me as well. So lots and lots of different influences. A very wonderful Northumbrian piper called Chris Ormston, who was commissioned at the same time as me to produce independently a piece of music for the same occasion that I was commissioned to produce The Wind and the Wetter, which was a launch of a Northumberland poet, his posthumous collected works, a poet called Fred Reed. And we both had a commission, and we met and we said, can we put these two things together? So The Wind and the Wetter then became Chris's music, Mind Your Language, he called it, and my Wind and the Wetter, when we put them together as a performance. And we performed that widely in the Northeast and elsewhere. We toured it to different places. And then performed other long poems, because I've written a lot for commission for radio, and many of those pieces have been half-hour pieces, often interspersed with the voices of actual people from the places that I've written about, and those voices have inspired the poem. So there's a kind of interplay between voice and poetry in the radio versions. But then for live performance, when we didn't have the voices, Chris would work with the Northumbrian pipes, which is a unique instrument because it comes from Northumberland. I think Northumberland is the only county to have its own instrument. So this Northumberland small pipes and my poetry seem to work together very well. So there was that side of things, and I worked with another well-known Northumbrian musician called Alistair Anderson, who is a great virtuoso on the concertina, and again we've performed in different parts of the country. So there's all that work, and then together with Alistair, I've written a couple of long performances for stage. We wrote a millennium musical based on the border ballad Tam Lin, which was for a local school, which was a wonderful experience. They were great singers, and there were solos and choruses, and it was through sung, and it was all in Northumbrian dialect. So that was a great experience doing that. So that was one aspect of music. But then the other really important part for me was a person who was kind of very influential in my life for a very long time, over 3 decades, but influential in different ways. And he was a friend. His name is Peter Zinoviev. He was himself an incredible both composer and also inventor, and a really seminal figure in electronic music in the 1960s and 70s. Anybody that doesn't know about his work, go away and look him up, Peter Zinoviev, because he had a music studio in London long before I knew him. And this studio was one of the first places in the world to use computers in music. Peter reckoned he was the first person in the world to have a home computer. I don't know whether that's true, but he was certainly one of the first. He had a computer in his house from 1968 and was dragging music, as Harrison Birtwistle, who was one of his collaborators, Harrison Birtwistle said Peter dragged music out of the Stone Age. And he did, because he used computers both to compose music and to drive the peripherals that made music. And indeed he even came up with the idea of a kind of primitive AI program for music, at this really, really early stage. So in a way, electronic music only caught up with him much, much later. And we made a piece, first of all, based around the Uffington White Horse, which was a piece both for performance and for radio, and it was for voice and computer, so it was a sort of duet between Peter's computer and my voice, and it was all about the sort of deep time of the landscape around the chalk figure of the Uffington Horse, and the idea of horses in culture, and the figure itself, which is nearly 3,000 years old. It's a late Bronze Age figure. So that was a wonderful opportunity, and that started really the sequence of work that we did together. And we produced in 10 years 5 half-hour performance pieces, and 3 of them were multi-channel pieces, because that was really Peter's area of interest. He liked working in the round. And we produced these pieces for the planetarium at the Life Science Centre in Newcastle. And the texts for those are in the book Edge. And then the last piece we made was a stereo piece. It had to be stereo because it had to be performed online due to COVID. And that was Peter's his last piece, because he very sadly died in 2021. But he was an enormous inspiration to me. And I suppose the third thing to talk about music is that a number of composers, I've been very lucky that a number of composers have been interested in my work and have set them. Notably last year, the young composer Christina Arakelian set some poetry of mine for the Proms, and there's a composer called Gavin Higgins who's currently setting a couple of my poems as part of a longer sequence he's doing for the Aldborough Festival. So it's lovely when things like that happen too. But I'm looking forward to that.
Do you want to read us out with one last piece?
I'm here at Magdalene College in particular because of a young poet called Joe Wright, who is from County Durham, not so far from where I grew up, and he got in touch with me over the summer because he's writing about poetry from the Northeast as part of his undergraduate thesis, his dissertation. And I read some of his poetry, and it is absolutely terrific. So we've made this lovely connection, and he will be in the audience, but I'm also hoping that I'll hear a poem from him tonight too. This poem, Sand Martins, is based on the shore between a place called Low Hawksley and Amble, so it's a bit south of where I live in Northumberland. And that shore is an incredible place because archaeologists have discovered a layer of peat in the dunes which stretches out into the shore, with footprints in it which are 7,000 years old, and they're both human and animal prints. And they're from a time when, just after the land bridge between Britain and Europe had been inundated by a great tsunami. It's about 1,000 years after that, but the whole archaeology and later geology of this shore is very, very interesting. So I was thinking about those people who left those footprints and thinking probably they would see the same birds that we see now, the movement of birds which connects the whole of the planet. The birds are the most incredible sort of global clock as they migrate from one continent to another. And sand martins are migratory birds. So I thought I'd write this poem about them. They arrive every late spring, and they make their nests in the dunes. And they're a very, very ancient connection to these people from long ago. Sand martins. If you want to know who we were, who left our footprints behind us, look no further than the mysterious holes in the dune, a few meters above its black peat. So quick and alive now, and so other. All day the sand martins twist and braid, silken and lethal to the small flies they snap up for their children. Folded flat, they post themselves into their burrows, Earth's sweet, damp guts, known only to those who walk ahead of us. Their squeaks and chirrups, just as we heard them that summer. A small town, teeming with families, their little blunt faces bursting into the light, until the sky is joyous with secrets they know and we do not. Their dark shuttles braiding now, now, until they are gone.
Cambridge Arts Roundup with Simon Bertin.
This is Cambridge Radio.
The sculptural art of Zimbabwe is something I've often enjoyed in African settings, and I didn't know that a celebrity artist from Zimbabwe was quietly living and working in midwinter Cambridge until I happened upon him in a gallery through a friend, Liz Corbett. Sculptor Euwitt Nayanhongo comes from a family of sculptors and is the son of Claude Nayanhongo, who helped pioneer the modern sculpture movement in Zimbabwe. His home is Nyanga in Zimbabwe's mountainous eastern highlands, and his sculpture often pays tribute to the specific culture and traditions of this region. He's exhibited internationally for decades, and his work stands in important private collections in Australia, Europe and North America. Euwitt began sculpting aged 12 during school holidays, and he often assisted his father in finishing off sculptures. He believes that his inspiration is derived from the Nyanga Mountains, and that these spiritual rocks provide him with artistic visions, so he often spends time working in the mountains. His work portrays human affinity with nature, animals, birds, spirits, and mythological beliefs of the Shona tribe. Euwitt showed me a selection of works at his Cambridge studio, explaining the delightful provenance. There are lots of great artists in Zimbabwe and lots of great artwork to go and see. You're producing works in stone here, the sculptural works. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about what happens when you work? Because you're taking a lump of rock.
This one is springstone.
Springstone,
and it comes from Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from a Great Dyke range. I import them from Zimbabwe.
Is that quite a business bringing that stone in? Because it's got to come a long way, and you need quite a lot of it, don't you?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult thing because it's not easy to import these raw stones from Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another challenge.
A cargo container full of sculptures and full of rock coming over.
Yes. Of course, if you want to import these raw stones, you have to have a license to import them. So that's what you have to do.
And obviously, these things go on sale in England at very premium prices. You know, they're things that people love, that they
by. Tell me a little bit about what happens when you get your stone here, because you get it on the table here in England and then you set to work on it. So what happens when you work?
When I get a piece of rock, at times I don't know what I want to make, but the stone will tell me what I have to do. I have to speak to the stone. I have to communicate with it, and then maybe I listen to it, or maybe I will tell it what I want. Those are some of the differences that are there. It's like maybe I have a picture in mind, but I have to find a suitable stone to suit what is in my mind, or I have to follow what is on that rock, because every rock is a sculpture on its own. It's only that you have to look into it and see what is inside it, and then try to remove the unwanted pieces and remain with the...
You've got a rock which you've managed to fashion into a head being held in two hands very gracefully. So how did that idea come about?
I was thinking of the elections in America, and everyone was anxious to know the outcome of the results. And I tried to put that on this rock. So it's a person holding his hand like this.
So it's expressing dismay.
Yes.
Dismay at the Trump election. Yes. That's wonderful. And it's a beautiful piece. I mean, I can see that's coming together really well.
Exactly.
And it does have that feeling of sadness that you've managed to capture in the stone, which I think is really good.
Yeah. And I didn't put the face on it because it's kind of a feeling. That I'm trying to
an emotion
put across. Yes.
And how long would you work on a piece like this when you're doing it?
Normally, I don't have a specific time that I can give. It all depends with my inspiration and how much time I'm spending on it. Because when you are working on a piece, at times you get stuck of ideas because maybe you don't have inspiration to work. That's when you get the inspiration, that's when you start to work on it. So there's no specific time that I can tell that I can take on working on this piece. But mostly, a month and a half will be enough for me to finish this one. And also, it depends with the hardness. So one is because the inspiration, the time you spend working on it, and how many pieces are you working on? Because at times I don't work on one piece at a time. I work on several pieces, giving them time for me to have a look at it and try to get more ideas on it.
These fingers here in the rock are very beautiful. They have a lovely sort of placid feeling about them, you know. And you create that. I mean, what happens when you do something like that? Did you just sort of work on it and they formed into that, or did you have a specific idea that was how they were going to look in the end?
Yeah, because it was like the rock was even coming to this side, so I had to remove and adjust the hand and make it have that feeling, because that's where the feeling is coming from. So I had to tune it to the way I want it.
So it's a physical embodiment of the feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then we've got this other one over here, which is a woman. Well, it's a rock which only has a woman's head coming out of its shape, rather like a kind of embryonic kind of feeling, or feeling of the womb.
It's like a soul feeling.
Yeah.
It's coming from the heart, and as you can look at it, there's a shape of a heart on it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to take out the feeling that is inside, that the soul feeling. That's what I was trying to bring out.
So it's a gentle soul feeling.
Yes.
And I love the way that you've done the head, because it's very much a person at rest, isn't it? So,
exactly.
At peace, at rest, and then you decorated the ear is wonderful, because it's rather like a scallop shell. So is that symbolic of something?
No, it's not symbolic, but it's just to make the texture, to make the sculpture come out nicely. Because if you can look at the flow of the hair, the ear, and the natural part of that rock that I have left, that brings out the texture of the sculpture and the difference, so that it comes out nicely.
Who have been your influences? Obviously, your father was important in teaching you, and the art school that you went to. But have there been particular influences in the sculptural world that have helped you shape your work, or is it entirely just intuitively done from your own sense of what's happening?
It's like I didn't go to school. It's only that I grew up in it, because my father was a sculptor, so I didn't go to school. I just started from nowhere, and my father guided me through. My brothers and sister also did a lot of work to build me up, and also my father used to take me to some of his friends who were also artists, like Damian Manua, just to teach me in some other ways, because my father used to have his own line of sculptures, which was different from Damian. So he used to take me to Damian so that I would learn how to sculpt some animals, because Damian used to work on some animals. And Claude used to work on the human, birds, and spirits. And so to fuse all those things, that made me to have my own line of art.
Does folklore play a big part in your choice of subject and the way that you do it? I mean, what do you draw upon culturally for doing the work?
Yes, it plays a role, because I have to go alongside that line, because that's our culture. So I have to follow that.
You have to follow it. Okay,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay. So, are there any features of it that you could explain to me? That are ideas that you feel are sort of prevalent in that you include in your art. Is that something that you do?
And then our culture, at times, you try to move away from it because we are moving into the modern world, but then you don't live it directly. You just have to follow it here and there and try to cope up with the modern world.
Okay, so in many ways it's kind of adaptive in that sense.
Yes.
Yeah. And then what have you got over here? You've got other rocks that you're working on. Is it really hard work with your hammer and chisel and tools here to basically transform, a rock like that? I mean, does it take hours and hours of chipping away carefully, or is that
Exactly, it takes hours.
Yeah.
Exactly, it takes hours, and you need to be very patient to work on it, because they are very hard.
Do they crack sometimes?
Yes,
when in the
sometimes
middle. So you may be working on a masterpiece and then
Yes.
suddenly it cracks down the middle.
You have to part with it.
You have to part with it. That must be really frustrating. when that
Yeah,
happens.
exactly. Yeah.
Especially if it's a success that goes wrong. Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
and the bad part of it thing, you will not be able to bring out exactly the same sculpture that you have made.
This is a different stone, isn't it?
Yeah, this one is a different stone. This comes from Nyanga,
Yeah, Younger.
which is my father's quarry, and that's where I come from. I come from Nyanga, so this stone we just say take it from my father's quarry. But this one is called serpentine. We call it Nyanga serpentine. Nyanga is the name where it comes from. We have got so many different of serpentines, but this one we call it Nyanga serpentine because of where we take it from.
It's a beautiful kind of green, marbly kind of type rock. It's like a cross between marble and quartz, isn't it? Basically,
Yes. Yes.
which is amazing, and it's got all of these wonderfully, they're like veins of different coloured rock inside it, and you've had it polished as well.
Yes.
So that makes a very smart little piece for your home. That's an interesting one. It's a sort of black jet, and it's almost like a large termite with a face on it in a kind of black colour thing in it.
Yes.
So in many ways that could be someone peering out of an entity or something like that.
Yes.
So is that a sort of subconscious thing, or what's the concept behind that one?
It's a person coming out of a landscape.
A person coming out of a landscape.
Yes, it's coming out of a landscape, and then is a sort of a spiritual person. Yes.
So, is it like a kind of a spirit of the rock, or a spirit of a particular place, or is it tied to legend, or is it just a concept that you came up with?
It's a spirit of the earth.
So that's great, and you've given it a face, and it's also I mean it's a slightly green dark. It's very dark colour.
Yes.
And the face is very kind of it's mysterious in a way, isn't
Exactly,
it?
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's really good fun. And then the black one behind it.
It's an abstract about the people coming together for one agenda. They've got one agenda, and then they have to do it together. If it is a meeting, they have to do everything together.
So it's unity.
So this is, yes,
Unity.
it's all about unity. I was trying to capture it in an abstract form, that people should do one thing. If it is a family, they have to do everything together.
Okay, so what we've got is three beautiful shapes which are laid on top of each other in such a way that you can see. I mean, they're not. How would you describe that shape? It's not oblong. It's not triangular. But it's like something in between. Are these like feathers along the front, depicting something like feathers or birds?
These are
or
not
something?
feathers, but these are the ideas.
Yeah.
This symbols the ideas that you'll be sharing. And if you can look at the back, there's the same lines. So
it's an agreement.
You are an agreement. You are moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a lovely and also there is that kind of a connotation of a bird's beak, like a flamingo or something like that at the front, because you know how birds stick together. You know,
exactly. They flock together.
Yeah.
If you can look at them, they flock in the same direction, but you don't know how they communicated and how they do it. So it's something that is also spiritual.
So I mean, in many ways, it's like a shoal of fish that they all move in the same way together.
Exactly.
That natural force.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's what.
Exactly.
That's a lovely sculpture.
Yeah,
that one. Yeah, I like that.
sure.
Let's look at some of the other ones. What else have we got? Oh, now down here, that looks great. So. So we've got two in this, once again, in this kind of stone, which is like a cross between quartz and marble. We have two beautiful heads nestling against each other, and showing a kind of spiritual affection.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
So tell me about it.
Yeah, this is all about love. People should love each other, like the twins. You know, the twins, they always move together. They are always, they share the same mind, the same feeling. So in families, we should do the same so that we move forward. We should love each other. That was my main theme on this one.
It captures that a very close feeling as the foreheads touch. And the cheeks touch. It has a very gentle feeling in the middle of it, doesn't it?
Yes. People love my work so much, and it's not my first time to be here in Cambridge. I have been here in '99. I did an exhibition at Clare Hall, and I did another one the other year in 2000. This is a family. Father, mother, and two kids. It's all about unity.
And they're hugging together.
Yes, they're hugging together. They've got the same feeling. So there's a spirit of togetherness.
I mean, what I like about this particularly is the simplicity of it, because you've taken that concept of that kind of snuggly family, and you've managed to get it right into a stone. And once you know, you need a little bit of a clue as to what it is. But once you know that, you can immediately identify with it as a piece of artwork.
Exactly.
And I love the simplicity of it. I think it also kind of says that the important thing about this is love. in the family.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
They're holding on to each other.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yes.
Yeah,
The spirit of togetherness.
yeah, lovely.
Yes.
Now, does that depicts? Obviously, it's a man, and his hands are together. Is it guidance? Is that the theme? Or is it dignity, or what is it?
He is expressing a point.
A point, yeah.
Yes, he's expressing a point.
He's got lovely hands in the middle, pointing together. So it's kind of, and I like the way the shoulders have that feeling of, kind of relaxed feeling to them as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he looks like a very serious figure as well.
Yes, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That one is called "Moving in the Wind,"
Right. Okay.
and it's in a spiritual form, and it's a person. As you can see, those hands, but without the head, and here you can see these lines. They make up the movement of the wind.
So the elements.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Does the hand give you a sense of direction or orientation in it? Because it's got this hand coming out of the stone at the top, or what looks like a hand anyway. Is it a hand?
Yes, it's a hand.
Yeah.
And this is a hand, and it's a cloth. This is a cloth. And as you can see, just like this one, it's a sleeve. Yes, that's a sleeve in the hand, and it's in spiritual form.
The spiritual form.
Yes.
And then this black one here, with a hand pointing a finger up towards the sky.
That one is a bird, and
a bird.
also in a spiritual form again.
Mm-hmm.
It's called King of the Jungle.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to express that there are chiefs and kings in our daily living, in our culture. And then I was trying to say even the birds also have their own chiefs. So that's
that's wonderful. Their own hierarchy.
Exactly.
So it's a natural state of affairs to be organised in this way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. So we've come into an outhouse now, and we're looking at about 6 different sculptures. What about this green one? Because this is quite a large sculpture, and it seems to be a person with a baby. Is that what it is?
Yes, it's a person with the baby, but it's also in a spiritual form. So it's protecting the baby.
And basically it's the beginning of a spiritual life as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so protecting a baby, and I mean
wing.
Like an angel's wing.
Like an angel. So this one is an angel protecting the baby.
So a guardian angel protecting a baby.
Yes.
And it's in a beautiful rock. What's this rock? Because this is different, isn't it, from the other rocks?
Yeah, it's also
sort of greeny, mottled green and brown.
That's a serpentine, but they've got some very hard substances like quartz.
Yeah. That's an absolutely beautiful sculpture.
Yeah.
Lovely.
This one is my father's piece. So that's one of his pieces that he had made during his lifetime. He named it King of the Jungle. The back of the head is like the person is changing into an animal. And then the back of the head is symbolizing a horn.
A horn, yeah.
A horn of a cow. So it's sort of a changing from his form into another form.
Into another form.
Yes.
And it's beautiful because you've got lots of lovely suggestion in that of a spiritual nature kind of captured in it.
Yes.
Because it does look. I mean, it looks friendly, but it's also slightly haunting, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And then this blue one, what's that?
This one is called In the Universe.
Yeah.
And it's made out of lapidolite.
Yeah.
That's the type of stone. And it's a person in the universe.
And it has lots of speckles and things that look like the night sky.
Yes, you can see the speckles in the in the stone. Yes.
That's wonderful, and it's an unusual shape as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have landed from another planet, perhaps.
Yeah.
Or come from the stars.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the theme for that one. That's absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
And you've got these small ones.
And this one is also from my father. And it's a human face with the bird at the top here. You can see this one. We all survive because we have got those who look after us.
Yeah. Accompanying spirits.
Accompanying
guardian
spirits,
angels.
yes, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
that's a guardian angel, yeah.
So basically that's about security, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Feeling secure,
Yeah.
feeling safe, feeling protected.
Exactly.
Feeling spiritually at ease.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a nice theme for a piece. Absolutely wonderful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I hope to have tickled your fancy for poetry and art in some novel directions, and I'll be back with more creative stories in the new year. Wishing you a very happy Christmas, I say au revoir for now. Thank you for listening to Cambridge Arts Roundup on Cambridge Radio.